Now, home EMP protection for the home. When I was looking up some of your stuff there, you had 3 steps to protecting a home. It was like whole house, high frequency, and then small broadband lines. What can you cover
Yeah.
down on that?
Yeah. So with the home, you have at least the benefit of knowing where the conducted energy is going to come from, right? It's coming in through the utility company because that's where those giant antennas called power lines are attached, right? And so you're going to bring in lots of energy through those lines because there's just the sheer length of the antennas. So what you want to do is get to a centralized location and try and suppress that energy before it gets into everything, right? If you can. And you can't stop. Now, we're trying to address the conducted energy coming in on lines. There's still going to be radiated energy coming through the walls of the house and all that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the big threat really is the conducted energy coming in. So what I tell people is put a really good surge protector at your main panel.
Mhm.
There's one I like. I like the Siemens FS140. It's just the one on my house. I looked at, I don't know, 25 different surge protectors, took them all apart, looked at all the components. Some of them were amazingly bad, and some of them were pretty good. And the Siemens was the best one I could find. So I just tell people, I don't have any relationship with Siemens. I just think it's a great product, and not terribly expensive, a few $100. So that's the first thing I say. If you can't do anything else, just put a really good surge protector at your home and panel. It connects to its own dedicated breaker, like a 20 amp breaker at your house, and it will help protect your home from any surges that come in on the conducted line. Great, whether it's a nearby lightning strike or something else, right? After that, you can put these special ferrites. They're called high saturation ferrites. As far as I know, we're the only one that sells them. I made them, but you clip one around each of the main wires that comes into your house. These are the big, thick 4-aught wires.
Right.
So line 1, line 2, neutral. For ground, you can use a regular broadband ferrite, but you click a ferrite around each of the wires, and those try and stop those really fast current transients that might come into the home. All right. So between those two things at the breaker panel, that's what you can do there. And I think it's a reasonable investment to do that to protect your home. Now you can go inside the home and you can say, well, I got a lot of stuff in here, and I certainly could still get energy in these wires in the house and things. So what people do is you can clip broadband ferrites, which just mean general regular ferrites, around the power cords of any sensitive electronics that you've got. So if you got a computer, you put it around the power cord, you put a ferrite around it. If you got a nice TV, put a ferrite around the cord. They're not terribly expensive. They last forever. They don't ever burn out or anything. The only way you damage them is to drop them and they break. So you can put these ferrites on your appliances and things that are susceptible. That helps prevent transient damage. You can also similarly use power strips that have built-in surge protection. I like Trip Light, for example, but you can use any brand you like. Plug in your sensitive electronics into those little surge strips. It's another layer of protection. And then finally, if you have freestanding electronics, like things that are not plugged in, you can store them if they're not being used in like a Faraday bag, for example. You can go to the website, there's tons of different sizes and all that. And my thinking is anything inside of a Faraday bag is not going to be damaged. It does such a great job of shielding them that it's just almost impossible to cause damage. Even a very susceptible thing like a radio is just difficult to damage inside of a bag. So those are kind of the steps: Faraday bags and containers for things that are isolated, ferrites on the power cords of things in the house, maybe with a surge strips, and then go to the breaker panel and put on high saturation ferrites and a good surge protection device at the breaker panel.
On the ferrites, I have OCD about things, and I'm in the world that more is better. Is putting more of those on, would if
You get better protection. Yeah.
it give you more protection?
Yeah. So the short of the answer is yes, you do. You get about twice the protection if you put 2 ferrites as opposed to 1. But there's a better way. The better way is to use a bigger ferrite and wrap the cord through the ferrite more than once, because you get a squared benefit then. So 2 wraps gives you 4 times the protection. 3 wraps gives you 8 times the protection, right? So you get a squaring action. And that works great as long as you get a big enough ferrite that you can get the loops through it.
Okay.
And so you will see that, like on my video camera in my car, I noticed they loop twice through the ferrite before they plug it up. Again, they get to benefit from that, and they don't have to buy a second ferrite. So that's great. So again, looping is a little better than multiples, but sometimes you can't loop because the cords are just too big or too rigid, and then a couple of ferrites would be a little better than 1.
Gotcha. No, that's good to know. Yeah. You got me thinking about a lot of this now. I'm going to be going back on your website and looking at that vehicle kit because it just makes sense. I have a 21 GMC pickup truck. So it has all the bells and
Sure.
computerized whistles. And, it's like, hey,
Yeah.
I want that thing running if something happens. I see a lot of people talk every once in a while about EMP protection for home walls, where people are talking about, and I think you mentioned it, you have you work in a room or whatever that's basically a Faraday cage. How would somebody set up a room to be a Faraday cage?
Okay, so you have to address all faces of the room. You can't like just do one wall, for example. I mean, the truth be told is if you do one wall and you're right up against the wall, you actually do knock a lot of the energy off because all the angles, come in and off that. But if the energy comes in from above, it's going to get you, or on the side, it's going to get you. So you have to do floor, ceiling, walls, everything, and it all has to be coated in something conductive. And there are a number of ways to do it. Professional rooms are usually made out of like copper, either copper screen or solid copper plate. And that works beautifully. But you have to pay a lot of attention to the seams where these copper panels come up against each other. In fact, it's the seams that get you almost always. Any metal works great to block high frequency energy. But if you take a knife and you cut a seam in it, the energy just squeaks right through that seam and does all kinds of problems for you. It's called a slot antenna. And so long, narrow seams are really bad for keeping out energy. It's an interesting experiment to make a homemade Faraday cage. Let's say a big galvanized garbage can, and you tape it all up with the conductive tape, and it's all sealed up nice and tight. Inside, you might have 80 dB of shielding, which is great. 99.9%, 99.99% of the energy gone, right? And then you think, all right, and I've done this demo at some things before. I said, what happens if I take my drill and I've got an 1/8-inch drill bit or something, and I start drilling holes in the side of the Faraday cage? How's the shielding going to go down? Is it going to down like that, or is it just going to be a little bit? And it ends up you can drill 30 holes in that thing, and the shielding's almost unchanged. All right. You can drill 50 holes. It just doesn't, those little holes don't do much because the dimension of the hole matters a lot. But if you then take a knife and you cut a very thin slot that's 6 inches, let's say, around the side of it, the shielding will drop from 80 to 20. It'll just drastically cut down. And that's because of the effect of the length of the slot is what really matters. So when you're building a Faraday cage, pay attention to the long, narrow seams, not the tiny holes. People always ask me, oh, I've got a pinhole by the rivet. Is that going to matter? No, the pinhole's not going to matter. But think about how the lid goes on, and that seam around the lid, that's what's going to eat your lunch for the shielding. And so pay attention to those things. So anyway, if you're going to do it at a home, you'd have to think along those lines. How do I seal all my seams up? And usually it's done with copper tape, where you seal all the seams up to get a nice tight RF seal. And that's the way rooms are done, professional rooms too. It's a task to do properly. It's a real task to create a real shielded space. And then you have to think about all the wires that go into the room. Everything that goes in, without exception, that's conducted, like a power wire, has to go through a filter. All right. So you have to buy a special EMP filter, which is inductors and capacitors, and the power goes through it before it goes into the room. And there's very special ones of those made. I can get them for people, but they're very specialized things to create a room like this. You can run fiber in and out. That's nice. Fiber optics usually doesn't have a conductive element to it, so you can run those in and out. And then even airflow, you think about, I got to have airflow into my room or I'm going to burn in there. You have to put in special vents, which look kind of like a bunch of straws glued together. It's called a honeycomb vent that are made a specific dimension where the RF energy can't get down the tubes. They're called waveguides. And so you have to buy these special vents to go up over the air hole areas so the air can flow through the room. There's a whole art to it to do properly. And anyway, that's how it's done.
You mentioned that it can be mesh, like a copper mesh around. Is there a size to the the mesh on that? You mentioned size of holes.
Right. Yeah. So people often say, I'm going to build a Faraday cage out of chicken wire. That was the famous one.
That was what I've heard that so much.
So I tested that. It's on one of my videos on the channel where I built a chicken wire cage versus a solid one, aluminum foil, let's say. And what you find is that you want the holes to be no bigger than about 1 millimeter. So chicken wire doesn't do very good. Gives you maybe, I don't remember, it was 8 dB of shielding or something like that. You want about 50 dB of shielding. All right. So chicken wire doesn't do very good, but it's better than nothing. But you're much better off with a solid piece of aluminum foil or even like a screen or something. About 1 millimeter is about the biggest hole you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds expensive to build a Faraday room.
It is. To build a quality room, even a fairly modest room might be, I don't know, $80,000, $100,000, something like that.
Okay.
Have a professional do it. If you did your own with, your own aluminum foilie and things, you could probably do it for, not counting the power filter, you could probably do it for a few $100. But then when you have to buy the power filter, that might cost you a couple $1,000s, something like
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Now, two things that I think of when it comes to protecting the home is people, having your own generator backup and having solar panels.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
If those go out, now you're kind of back to square one on not having power. So you protect your home, you put on your ferrites, you do all this, you put the Siemens on and everything's good to go. How do you protect the generator? And then how do you protect solar panels?
Solar, yeah. Well, the good news is the generator, I have a generator on my home too. They have a little bit of control electronics, but they're not overly complicated. And they're fairly simple things. And there's not a lot you can do to get in them. But the only thing I recommend for those is that you put a large ferrite around the main power cord coming off the generator. And you put it as close to the generator as you can, because you always put ferrites close to what you're trying to protect. And that's all I do to protect my generator. Generators by themselves are pretty robust. That's the good news, especially if you have a portable generator that's just disconnected from everything, right? It's just rolled in your garage. Essentially, those are not able to be damaged because they just don't have anything to damage in them. Now, mine's a whole house generator, so it is powered to some degree at all time and all of that, which is why I put the ferrites on it. But that's all I recommend for the generators. So solar, we talk about solar. Basically, you put a ferrite at each end of the big long wires that go from the panels down to the inverter. That's probably the best protection you can do for the panels. Panels by themselves, by the way, are pretty robust. They're hard to damage because they have high currents and high voltages typically already. So anyway, you do that for the wires that come down. And then at the inverter, you usually want to have a surge protector on each side, meaning one for the DC side and one for the AC side. So the AC side is usually connected to the main. It usually goes to a transfer switch and then your main panel. So that side's already protected by the Siemens once it's switched in anyway. Okay. So you may not need a separate one on the AC side, but the DC side, usually you have to add a surge protector to. And some inverters are already made with them. They already have surge protectors in them, and other ones you can look and add them to them. A company I know that makes good quality surge protection, DC surge protection, is Midnight Solar. If you look up their products, again, I don't have any relationship with them. I just have seen their products and I like them. They're good, robust products. So that's for the DC side of your inverter. And then finally, if you have a battery backup, you can put either a large toroid, which is a ferrite that doesn't open and close. It's just a big donut, really. You can put that around the two power wires, or you can put a large ferrite around the two if it will fit. Sometimes the wires are really thick and you can't get a ferrite around both, but you want to try and clamp the energy that might come down into the batteries as well if you can. Right, and that's kind of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So your solar panels probably will be all right. It's the electronic devices and electronic
your inverter's
operating system that you have for it.
Yeah, charge controller and inverter are the most likely to be damaged. And you can damage the panels if you don't do anything. If you don't put any ferrites, you can damage them, but they're just pretty robust.
Okay. So last, before we get out of here, is a few questions I had from listeners. One, are batteries impacted by EMPs? And I think they're referring to your
alkaline batteries,
volt, your AA's, AAA's, and all that.
Yeah. Short answer is no. Normal chemical batteries, alkaline batteries, and stuff are not damaged. The only things that are damaged are the ones that have battery management systems in them, BMS systems, where it's controlling the charging of like lithium batteries and things like that. So a laptop battery might be damaged, but your AAA batteries won't be damaged.
Oh, good to know. That's awesome. I don't have to keep them in a Faraday bag.
No, don't have to. No.
Speaking of Faraday bags, what are your thoughts on I guess it's like the metallic cloth that's made for as Faraday bags? Do they work?
They work great. Yeah, they work fantastic. We sell the Faraday Defense product, but there are others out there too. They provide, just to show you how good they are, the goal is to get 50 dB of shielding. Pretty much anything survives with 50 dB. Those bags give you around 100 dB of shielding. 99.999% of the field is dropped out. They're just extremely good at shielding. So yeah, they work great.
Oh, that's awesome. And then something I saw online people were wondering, is there any impact of 5G on on electronics devices during an EMP or CME? I guess it'd be during.
Yeah. No, not really. 5G is we could have a whole conversation about 5G and my thoughts on all that, but it is just a technology. And where we wanted to go is these very high frequency communications where you're in tens of gigahertz for cell phones as opposed to a gigahertz or two. And there's a lot of health concerns around it, but not counting that, it doesn't affect the susceptibility. It doesn't affect any of that kind of thing. You could still damage 5G things just as easy as 4G, let's say. Okay. So I don't think it has any effect on EMP protection or EMP hardening.
Oh, right on. And then last question, actually, this is the last one, is someone mentioned, they said, besides maintaining your stored data and images and stuff on a phone or a device, what's the point if everything's going to be destroyed of worrying about your phone?
Yeah, well, you can ask that about anything, right? Why bother? Right. Hey, if everybody else is dying, what's the point of living anyway? I mean, and you can take that as far as you want. I've always took the view of the one thing I want in the time of a disaster is I want to have options, right? I want to have some choices of things I can do. And so it's why I tell people to protect your property, protect your home, try and harden your system, and give yourself some options. If you have a generator and you've managed to survive, most of the things in your house are still functioning, you've got options now, right? You can run your own systems for a limited amount of time. You can maybe have communication systems in your home that are still functional. You can cook food if you need to. You can wash some clothes if you had to. You got lots of options to function in some capacity that you wouldn't have if you didn't, right? Now, you could argue, oh, what's all that data going to do for me? Or what's my, my kids' photos and stuff going to mean? It might not mean a lot for you tomorrow, but it might mean, having your birth certificate and your critical papers stored somewhere you can get to them might mean a heck of a lot in a year when you're trying to prove that you are who you said you were, or that that bank account that you said was yours is really yours, or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's like all protections. Why do you store food? Why do you have a water filter? Why you're giving yourself some options that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And EMP protection is the same way. I want to have as much functioning around me as possible and be, able to do things if it were to occur, even if later I had to bug out. I had to get everything and head west because it didn't work. Maybe that option let me do that. Maybe I had the ability to figure out I can't stay here because of what I just heard over my radio. I know I got to leave, right? Or whatever the reason is. That's what I always tell people. That's why I have generator. That's why I have things, is I want to have some options down the road.
Yeah. It allows you to live as normal of a life as possible when things are kind of going sideways. So
yeah. And maybe to help others, I mean, others might need what little you can do for them and what little you can help. But our house we just recently bought, and one of the stories our neighbors told, was there was a big blackout here for a while. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, all the neighbors noticed this house was running, and they all came by and they got some help from it. They were able to get some help.
Charge up phones or do something that helps them out. Yeah.
Yeah.